Hello, have I got a microphone? If you're coming to this session with Sarah Owen MP, please make your way here. We're on a very tight schedule. Even song waits for no man or woman. So come in and sit down, please, because we're about to start. Oh, I thought everybody heard me say shit then. Okay. Are you coming in? Please come in and take your seats. Okay. Sarah, whilst people are settling, let me go some way to introduce you. So, Sarah Owen is the MP for Luton North, elected in 2019. We're delighted to have you here. You have got an interesting portfolio, which we will come on to in a minute, but your background was in the NHS and the trade union movement. But you were elected in 2019, and then we went into lockdown pretty soon after. What was that like?
Well, it was not what anybody expected, but I was also 7.5 months pregnant when I was elected. So I knew I had essentially a time limit on making sure that everything was set up as quickly as possible. And thank goodness I did have that, because we immediately went into lockdown. And it was really, most people go into politics because they love people, regardless of what political party they're in. I think it's one of those jobs you have to love people. And then to be locked away from people for years at a time was just really alienating for a job that you wanted to do and wanted to do well.
Yeah, we were talking about Zoom. I was explaining to Sarah the little hiccups we had with Simon Clarke earlier today, but she said that was nothing to trying to do Zoom with a baby on a changing mat that wouldn't wait.
No, on a change mat. And I remember doing a home office speech in the middle of my kitchen and really giving it welly and thinking, I don't know what my neighbours are going to think if they're seeing me getting really angry at a laptop in the middle of my kitchen. It was quite an alien thing to do. And it did feel very strange. And I am so glad just to see people again. And the novelty hasn't worn off for me, to be able to hug somebody, to be able to hold their hand if they come to a surgery and they're going through a really difficult time. Doing surgery over Zoom, it's just not the same. And for some people, we haven't always gone back to that yet, because not everybody is comfortable, or actually they found that's a better medium for them. And it works well for people, particularly that are working shifts and that they can't come during office hours. So I think some aspects have changed for the better, and we can be more efficient in the way that we work. But in terms of just basic humanity and being able to be with people, I'm so happy.
Well, I know when we had the first Big Tent Radix festival in Coventry, with first one after lockdown, we were all so excited. We might as well have been going to Glastonbury, which is not what you often feel like when you come to one of these things. But it's right what you say. I mean, what was interesting, that the webinars and things that we were running during lockdown, instead of the normal people who'd come on a Wednesday evening to somewhere in Whitehall or Westminster for a glass of warm white wine and a poisoned peanut, you'd got people in Scotland, you'd got people in Cornwall, you'd got council leaders in County Durham, you'd got young people, old people, people who couldn't or wouldn't. So the conversations became much more engaged and much wider.
Absolutely. So we had a lot of meetings where I suddenly noticed that there were more women and women of working age that were coming to these Zoom meetings, because you didn't have to find somebody to look after the children. You could multitask and do lots of different things. And I think my CLP had gone to just having one meeting where it was in person and one meeting where it's in Zoom now, because they realised that it gave people access in a different way. Parliament, unfortunately, really hasn't grasped that level of change. Yes, we still walk round and round into different corridors to physically vote, but yet now we tap a card and it seems like this weird halfway house, which actually doesn't really serve a purpose. And yet we still count each other when we come out as well. And Rachel's here, I see your local MP, fantastic local MP and brilliant advocate. So yeah, there are different things that could happen. Parliament has got better. I was listening to an old interview of Glenda Jackson talking about her time in Parliament and how it had changed and it had become more family friendly, but we've still got a long way to go.
Well, it might have become more family friendly, but it has become more threatening, particularly for women, hasn't it?
I think it's probably as bad or worse, but I think that there are now mechanisms where people can talk about it. Those processes probably aren't perfect yet. but it is progress that we are seeing people willing and able to come forward to have these complaints, and that they're done in an independent manner.
But it's the social media I was thinking of, you know, the death threats against Yvette Cooper and the abuse and the insults that, you know, all politicians get and shouldn't, but it's worse if you're a woman, isn't it?
It's worse if you're a woman, and it's worse if you're a woman of colour. Diane Abbott received nearly half, if not more than half, of all of the recorded abuse and threatening remarks on social media, and it's vile. It's a vile space. I've developed quite a system of coping with it. If somebody is hostile, I'll engage once usually, and then that's it. Take all power. I also report, and I think with Twitter, with Facebook, this is always on the person that's actually been wronged to still make the report, and I think that has a long way to go, and the online safety bill really does fall short of protecting people in that level. But I think on a human level, I knew what I was going into. It's when my family see it, particularly when my mum sees something that's racist, or she feels particularly hurt, and I hate her seeing that, because they didn't come into it. I did. I chose it. And also, these are things people wouldn't say to you in real life.
Oh, no.
So I quite often send them my constituency telephone number. I say, just give me a call, because they won't say it to you on the telephone, and they won't say it to you in your face. And if they do, then that really says more about them than it does you.
Well, you talk about racism and that sort of vile attack, and you were chair of Chinese for Labour, which I know has now changed its name. But in the conversations, the wider global national conversations, have you noticed a change in attitude or a worsening of attitude towards people of Chinese or Eastern and Southeast Asian origins?
Sadly, yes. And I think that that's not just around the kind of geopolitics and what's happening at the moment. What happened, it's always been there. There's always been an undercurrent of racism, and it almost seems to be like acceptable forms of racism. You still see examples of yellowface, for example, in stage productions of Miss Saigon, that you wouldn't, it's just not appropriate in this day and age at all. It's not appropriate many years ago. It's certainly not appropriate now, and it still continues. But during COVID, it was heightened, and obviously the irresponsible language of Donald Trump didn't help the situation, because it was given a disease, a virus that was harming everybody's lives, that no one was untouched by, was given a racial identity. And therefore, people that had or were perceived to be Chinese, and East and Southeast Asians in that included, were blamed for it. And I received a huge amount of, that's where most of my abusive and threatening kind of social media posts came. I was being sent videos of people eating live animals, for example. I was accused of eating raw meat, as well as wanting to be a global conspiracist. So it was pretty horrendous to be in. And even in the constituency, I had a man who was white write to me to say, I had never really experienced racism being a white man, but he was walking along with his girlfriend who was East and Southeast Asian origin, and people were just hurling abuse at them in the car, from their cars. And I think that we don't talk enough about that. And when we come to discussions about China, absolutely, we have got to be hugely critical, and I've been hugely critical of the Chinese state, but there is a big difference between what the state are doing and the people themselves, because the people themselves are also losing out in terms of democracy, in terms of freedom of speech. And we've seen the horrors of what's unfolding in Hong Kong, and we're probably going to see less and less of it because of the lack of freedom of press. So I think we have to hold in ourselves, and we are more than capable of doing this, being really firm and strong and tough against the Chinese state, while also being supportive of the people that are subjects of that state.
Now, Sarah, you are now Shadow Minister for Levelling Up Faith and Communities. The faith bit you took with you from your previous role. We're in the grounds of York Minster. Some people who are here will have heard the Dean, Dominic Barrington, this morning, who he almost gave us a blessing in a way, but it was very moving. And one of the reasons that we are on tight time is because of Evensong. But is faith important to you? Because it feels quite often that it's just an add-on in a government department, but it's hugely important, isn't it?
It's hugely important. And And I think you're right. It often does feel like an add-on, and it shouldn't. It really shouldn't. If we think about the time during COVID, we think about, in normal times, I will say, we're always focused on the economy, on how pounds and pence works and all of that. But in those times when we are really desperate, in those times when we're searching for something, it's that social infrastructure that keeps us going. And I think that that's where faith in our communities is so important. And I think it goes really well with local government, because we see those examples working well every single day. And you don't have to be a person of faith to actually believe that and work for it. I'm not. But when I got offered this role, I wanted to do it well. And I took it very seriously, because I grew up in a mixed heritage, but also a mixed faith household. My mum's a Buddhist. My dad's a Christian. My grandparents are very devout Christians, and my grandma in Malaysia is a very devout Buddhist. And so I felt a sense of responsibility to not get this wrong. And there are a lot of pitfalls here. There are a lot of potential areas where you could offend somebody, or you could just not understand. But actually, I've really loved this bit of the role. Now, the rest of the Shadow Levelling Up team joke that it's because I'm always eating at faith events.
Yeah, I suppose you could actually keep going all year, couldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I love my food, and it's a huge part of, I think, bringing people together. And it's also a great way to have some of those difficult conversations. I don't say break bread for nothing. You know, you are able to have those more difficult conversations, more meaningful conversations through that. And I think when we can get that part of our society and our infrastructure, our social infrastructure right, it's as important as everything else to me.
Okay, so let's bring it right back to what the theme of this conference is, which is about regeneration. And, you know, beautiful, wonderful, historic city, York, but, it's around, go down the road a little bit to Doncaster, look around. We've had Simon Clark earlier talking about Teesside. We've heard David Cleveley talking about clusters in Cambridge. Everybody's got a story. How do you measure success in regeneration in the sense of levelling up?
Well, I think at the moment what we're seeing, we see some limited amount of success, but I think it's where areas aren't pitted against each other. And that's what we have seen for the last 10 years. It's areas going against each other for different bids. And within areas themselves, you've got charities and organisations pitting against each other for bids and actually not working as a whole. And I think that when we get that right, and the levelling up bidding process for me is inherently wrong in the way that it was designed, and certainly the way that it's delivered, to pit towns against each other. And for example, in my town in Luton South, the central part of the town, where the football club is, yes,
Yeah, come on, Luton.
Where the football club is, they received funding. I mean, we've had £160 million taken away from us, but we got £20 million, which was key to trying to regenerate our town centre. But yet we bid in my part of the town, which is more suburban area, and yet we weren't told that actually, because we'd been right next door to somewhere that had already been awarded money, that there was no point in us actually bidding, and we could have saved officer time. And councils across the country have spent £27 million trying to bid for these levelling up funds. And actually, I think this is just about being honest about where you want to put these funds and having that conversation. Now, Keir's made a real commitment on having an act called the Take Back Control Act, which will be in his first King's speech if he was Prime Minister. And that is about having the biggest transfer of power from Westminster to town halls that you've ever seen. And I think this is about having an honest conversation with communities, not saying how much money are you going to give me, but us saying, what do we want to do together? And how do we make this workable? And is it achievable? And when is it achievable? And being honest, because we are going to inherit real difficult situation here, both financially and I think socially as well.
That is the perfect point to end on. I'm sorry it is so short, but we are under strict instructions. I hope you have all enjoyed today. Thank you, Sarah, very much. We've had some wonderful speakers throughout the day. We've had Tim Smith telling us to fear the future. We're talking about muscular localism, grumpy middle-aged men. We've heard about healing and mending. I've just been in with David Cleveley and we've been talking about cosmic flirting. And we had the dean this morning who, as I say, was, you know, suggesting that we might even sanctify this space. So my thanks to Sarah Owen. Thanks to you for coming. If you're going to Evensong, go now. It starts at 5:30. If you don't want to go to Evensong, you want to hang around and have a drink in the lovely grounds, please do. Whatever you do, have a lovely evening, and thank you very much for being part of Radix Big Tent. And thank you, Sarah.